Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley here for Pinkfresh Studio. Thanks for joining me today. Today I am creating this beautiful window card featuring the Happy Holidays circle frame stamp set, coordinating die, and coordinating layering stencil set. This is a really beautiful stamp, and I love holiday greenery. It is like one of my favorites. And I'm going to be creating a stained glass effect today using the coordinating stencils. And I'm going to show you how to do that by adding not only color, but some clear embossing over the top of it. Now, the colors I'm going to be using are a little non-traditional, and I was kind of inspired by both Leah Lawson recently, as well as Shannon Pelletier. I think I'm saying her name right. Forgive me, Shannon, if that is wrong. But both of them had kind of some alternative leaf colors, and Shannon had done some pink kind of scattered in, or some pink cardstock actually. I thought that was so beautiful. And so I'm using both of those color palettes or those colorways to kind of inspire my card today, which is different than both of their cards. So I'm starting out with the stamp mounted on my Misty stamping tool, and I have some Nina Solar White heavyweight cardstock loaded into my Misty. And I'm going to be doing some heat embossing to begin. So I've prepped the surface with my anti-static powder tool, and I'm inking up my stamp using some Versamark ink, and then I'm going to press it down. Now I'm just making sure that my paper is all the way pushed up into that corner, nestled really well, because I am going to stamp this twice. I probably need a new embossing pad. It's a little bit on the dry side. So I went ahead and stamped that twice. And now I'm coating this with some Wow embossing powder. This is a rich gold embossing powder. I will have it linked in the description below. And then I'm going to heat set that using my heat tool. Now you could do this in some regular stamping ink if you wanted. You could stamp this outline in a black or a gray, but because I'm going for that overall stained glass look effect, I am going to start out with the gold embossing powder. And you can see this is a really beautiful gold embossing powder. Now, once I have that embossed on my cardstock, I'm going to take this panel and I'm going to tape it down to my work surface so that I can do my stenciling. And I'm going to start out with the stencils. I did not actually do these in order. I did stencil 1, stencil 3, and then stencil 2. It kind of really doesn't matter. With a lot of the layering stencils, you can kind of go in whatever order you want. So I'm basically starting out with the solid area of the leaves, then I'm moving on to the detail layer of the leaves, and then I'm finishing off with the berries. So for the solid portion of the leaves, this is going to be the most area showing in the leaves. I'm going to be using the Pinkfresh Studio Aquamarine ink. And I'm just blending this over the stencil. The thing I love about ink blending in stencils is that it is very forgiving. So unlike ink blending an entire panel where you're really worried about these big splotches of ink and stuff, a stencil really kind of prevents that from happening. Now, you may have some buildup of color along the edges or the border of the stencil, but for the most part, you get these really nice, smooth, blended ink results, and it's not really that difficult. Now, I'm going to go ahead and wipe up my stencil using a dry cloth, and then I will remove stencil number 1. And I will put on stencil number 3. And I have that area of the embossing that is helping me kind of line up my stencil along the pattern of the stamping. Now, if you wanted to do a stenciled area without any stamping, you can use the guides that are in the corner of these layering stencils to line up your panel behind the stencil. And you will get that design right in the middle of your panel. So on the stencil and all these Pinkfresh layering stencils, there are some crop mark guides where you can line up an A2 size panel with the stencil. So if you wanted to do kind of like this no line coloring effect with these stencils, you can do that using the crop marks. Now for the detail layer of the leaves, I am using Tidal Pond. This is a gorgeous kind of tealy turquoise, I'm not sure what you want to call it, but I call it beautiful. So there you go. And I'm just blending that over the stencil. This is stencil number 3. So this is the detail layer of the leaves. And when I pulled this stencil back and I looked, I really wanted a little more darkness or a little more contrast between that first layer of aquamarine and the layer of the Tidal pond that I had just put on. So I just flipped my stencil back into place, taped it back down, and added another layer of the Tidal pond ink to really darken up that detail area on the leaves. And that gave me the look I was going for. Now I'm going to finish off my ink blending using the, you guessed it, Coral Reef ink. This is my favorite Pinkfresh color. It is absolutely beautiful. If you wanted to do a little more traditional looking berry, you could go with the candy apple or something like that. I really just love pink for Christmas. It is just, it's one of my things. I mean, I don't decorate with it in my house, but when it comes to card making, I love to throw in a little bit of pink for Christmas. And if you wanted to kind of mix your pinks and reds, you could absolutely do that as well. Now for the berries, I'm actually using a smaller size blending brush. You don't have to do this. It just kind of helps me get into those smaller areas of the stencil. And I happen to have them on hand, so I figured why not use them? And once I get the color blended on there, I'm going to go ahead and wipe up my stencil. And then I'm going to start the stained glass process of this card. So I will actually leave this stencil in place. I'm going to actually check my ink blending first. And once I know that I'm happy with the color that I got through the stencil, I'm going to prep the surface of this panel using an anti-static powder tool. And I'm going to replace the stencil back over the ink blending that I've already done. And I am grabbing an ink dauber or a sponge ink blending tool and my Versamark ink, and I am pressing a good amount of this ink through the stencil over the berries. This is going to add a layer of that sticky ink over the ink blending that I've already done and allow me to add some clear embossing powder over the top of it. And that's going to seal in that color and kind of protect it so that I can later on do a little ink blending over it, and that the ink blending I do then will not affect the color that's below it. So I'm going ahead and removing my panel from my work surface, and I'm going to pour on this Wow clear embossing powder. Now, once I have that clear embossing powder covering my panel where I've done my Versamark ink blending or my Versamark inking, I'm going to go ahead and heat set that with my heat tool. Then I'm going to place stencil number 1 back over my panel, and this is the solid area of the leaves. And I'm going to do the same thing with the Versamark ink, and I did prep that with the powder tool. And now I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool. And you can see when I'm done, I have this beautiful clear layer over all of my inking that I've done. Now, the key to this is you really want to make sure that you're moving your heat tool around so that you are not remelting the gold powder that's underneath too much. It could be a little tricky if you're not careful, but honestly, I didn't have any problems with it. And I get this beautiful shiny look over my ink blending, and it really gives it this very cool stained glass technique effect. So as I mentioned before, this embossing is going to protect the ink blending that I've done so that I can blend some ink over the top of this and make this entire panel pink. And so I've done that with the Ballet Slipper ink from Pinkfresh Studio. And now I'm using the coordinating die to die cut this panel, and I am left with this really cool circle frame panel. It is pink in the background. I did not use pink cardstock, but I used a white cardstock to create this. And I have that beautiful shiny stained glass effect. Now I'm working on my sentiment, and I'm using the Merriest Wishes sentiment from the Happy Holidays Circle Frame stamp, die, and coordinating stencil set. So this is a part of that stamp set that I used earlier. This is actually just one product suite that I'm using for the bulk of this card. And I'm taking the coordinating die after I've stamped this onto some white cardstock. I'm placing that and holding it in place with a little low tack tape and sending that through my die cut machine. Now for my card base is cut to 4 1/4 by 11 inches and scored at 5 1/2. This creates a top folding A2 size card. And I'm going to create a window on the front of this card using the inverted scallop circle dies from Pinkfresh Studio. So I'm holding that circle in place on my card base. And before I run it through my die cut machine, I'm going to open this up so that I'm only cutting through the front of my card and not the back of my card. Now this inverted circle scallop frame will leave an opening and you will see the scallops through the circle frame that Happy Holidays frame created. So it's going to be a really beautiful effect because you're going to have like this layered window effect. So I've added my panel on using some foam adhesive, and then I'm going to add my sentiment. But before I add my sentiment, I am cutting this kind of what looks like a banner piece. This is from the Artistic Bow die set. I've die cut that from some vellum, and I'm going to layer my sentiment right on top of that just to kind of add a little something to set this sentiment apart from all of the stuff that's going on the background. Now you'll notice that this sentiment is black. I went back and re-stamped my sentiment and heat embossed it using the same gold embossing powder that I started out with, and I just layered that over the top. Now at this point, I had considered putting that ink blended circle inside of my card so that you could see it. I didn't really care for that, so I just left it white on the inside. This is some linen cardstock, by the way, so it does have a little bit of texture. And I finished off my card by adding some die cut vellum leaves. This is from the Curvy leaves die set from Pinkfresh Studio. And I added some pink crystals as well using a little bit of liquid glue. And that finishes off my card for today. I love this stained glass window technique. It is so beautiful. You could do it with any of the Pinkfresh Studio layering stencils that you may have on hand. And what I would recommend doing, if I were going to do this again, the one thing that I would change is that I would not use a super fine embossing powder for my clear embossing powder. Instead, I would use a normal grind embossing powder. That would give me a little more loft and a lot more shine, and it would make this card even better. But I love the way that it turned out. As always, I will have links to the featured products used in this project in the description at YouTube, so if you're looking for something in particular, be sure you check there. If you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you would give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications on this YouTube channel so that you don't miss any of the paper crafting, card making, and wonderful video tutorials shared here. As always, thanks so much for stopping by. I'm so glad you're here, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.